I remember sitting in that chair across from her desk like it was yesterday. Chelsea Drummond, early 30s, Wharton MBA, 3 years at McKinsey before this. She had that polished confidence that comes from having succeeded everywhere you've ever tried, and the particular blindness that comes with it. The kind where you walk into a situation and assume that the confidence that got you everywhere else will translate to understanding what you're actually looking at. It was day 4 of her first week as VP of Operations. She was still learning where the bathrooms were on the executive floor, and she was firing me. I didn't see it coming, not because I should have, but because I'd never imagined anyone in leadership would remove me without understanding what I actually did. That was my mistake, I think. Underestimating how much certainty people can carry into a decision about something they don't understand. How willing they can be to make sweeping choices about infrastructure they've never touched. She told me the company needed fresh energy. She wanted to build her own team. She said I'd been here a long time, and sometimes organizations needed to move forward with new people who had new ideas. Her exact words were, "I think we need to modernize the department," as if the department I'd built over 12 years was running on typewriters and pneumatic tubes. As if progress was measured in how recently something was hired, not in how well it actually worked. She told me to have everything cleaned out by 5, and to make sure all documentation was handed over before I left. She said it the way you'd ask someone to return a library book. Casual. Administrative. The kind of thing you do when you're crossing items off a transition checklist Chelsea had probably printed from a McKinsey template about managing organizational change. She didn't ask questions. Didn't ask what the system did or how it worked, or whether there was a specific sequence to removing someone who'd been maintaining it. She just assumed that documentation was documentation, that systems were self-explanatory, that architecture could be transferred like a file folder. I remember the physical act of sitting there while she said these things, my hands resting on my thighs, my face arranged in something approximating professionalism. The window behind her showing the parking lot 6 stories down, the clock on the wall reading 2:35 p.m. I was acutely aware of all of it, while simultaneously feeling like I was watching the scene from somewhere else entirely. There's a strange feeling that comes when the ground shifts and you're still sitting down. You don't feel yourself fall, you just notice you're no longer where you were. I don't remember much of what I said back. Something professional. Something about the handover process, the complexity involved, the timeline that might be needed. I was operating on autopilot, speaking the language of organizational transitions, while some part of my brain was already calculating what would happen if she was serious, and calculating further still what would happen if she was serious, and nobody else in that building actually understood the answer. Let me back up. Let me tell you what I actually did here, because unless you understand that, the next part won't land the way it should. I came to this company 12 years ago. It was 2012. I was 31 years old. The company was a mid-sized food and consumer goods distribution network. We had 47 warehouses spread across the United States, everything from climate-controlled facilities for refrigerated goods to high bay operations for bulk commodities, to specialized regional hubs for returns processing. The company moved everything: packaged goods, refrigerated items, bulk commodities, specialty products, returns. We were profitable, stable, growing. But our operational infrastructure was held together with custom scripts, spreadsheet macros, and what I can only describe as prayers. The warehouse management system we had then was built in 1998. It was a licensed product from a vendor that had been bought and sold twice since then. The current owner had stopped meaningful development on it around 2003. It couldn't talk to our carrier systems in real time. It had no real-time inventory mesh across facilities. If a truck showed up at the wrong facility, it took hours of phone calls and manual rerouting to fix it. We were losing money on inefficiency we couldn't even quantify because we had no way to measure it. We'd guess at numbers, and the guesses were always wrong because the ground was always shifting. I remember walking through the warehouses in those first months, watching the dock teams manually reconcile inventory counts because the system wasn't syncing. Watching the shipping supervisors pull up printed manifests from the morning because the system wouldn't show them what was actually ready to go. Watching the carrier liaisons on the phone, trying to explain why their truck had been routed to the wrong facility, or why the load they thought they were picking up was actually halfway across the state. I remember standing on the dock at the Cincinnati facility at 4 a.m., watching guys manually count pallets under fluorescent lights because the system count couldn't be trusted. That's when I understood the scope of what needed to happen. I proposed a complete redesign. Not an upgrade, not an iteration on what existed. A ground-up rebuild from architecture to implementation. It took 2 years just to scope the work. I had to understand every single workflow across all 47 warehouses, not just the ones on the East Coast where most of the volume was, all of them. How dock doors actually worked. How many doors each facility had, which ones were receiving, which were shipping, which were cross-dock operations. How receiving and shipping teams coordinated during high-volume periods. How we managed inventory across multiple facilities for the same SKUs. How carriers called in for pickup and delivery windows, and how we coordinated with them. How returns flowed back through the system. Goods coming back from customers, being re-inspected, being restocked, or written off. How we managed seasonal peaks. How we managed supplier changes and product changes. I traveled to maybe 30 of those warehouses myself during those 2 years. Spent weeks at some of them. Came back to the major hubs over and over. Watched how things actually worked versus how the system thought they worked, and they were almost never the same thing. I learned the rhythm of dock operations. I learned about the relationships between warehouse managers and their carrier liaisons. I learned about the seasonal volume shifts that nobody in corporate understood the way the facility managers understood them. I learned that the system I was looking at was less a reflection of how work happened and more a monument to how work used to happen. The architecture I designed was modular. Each facility could adapt the core WMS to their specific needs, but they all connected back to a central inventory management hub. I built automated rerouting logic, so if a truck was headed to the wrong dock, the system could recognize the mismatch in real time and trigger alerts before the truck even arrived. That alone saved hours of manual coordination. I integrated directly with carrier APIs, so when a driver logged into our dock system with their credentials, it authenticated against their carrier system and pulled their current load data automatically. No mismatches, no guessing. No phone calls at 2 a.m. to figure out why a truck that was supposed to be here is somewhere else. I created a live inventory mesh that synchronized inventory counts across all facilities every 60 seconds. Not hourly, not daily, every 60 seconds. The system could tell you at any moment exactly where every SKU in the network was, how much inventory we had, and what was in motion. I designed dock rotation codes that automatically cycled every 24 hours for security. And those codes weren't just issued by the WMS, they were tied exclusively to it. The physical infrastructure of the dock doors was synchronized with the digital architecture. The two couldn't be separated. The licensing architecture was something I designed myself. It was custom. It had to be, because no standard product could do what this needed to do. I didn't do it for job security. I did it for operational integrity. The license verification was tied to an authentication credential embedded in my employee profile. I generated the license keys myself. The specs were never externally documented. I kept them in my own encrypted backups. I kept significant portions of the architecture in my own head, not in a malicious way, but in the way that certain knowledge just lives in the person who built it, the person who understands every connection and dependency and decision tree. There was no one else here who understood it completely, and there still wasn't. The system went live in phases, one region at a time. I started with the Cincinnati facility because they were the most cooperative and the most technically fluent. Got it working there, worked out the bugs. Then expanded to the regional hubs. Then rolled out across all 47 facilities over the course of 4 years. Each rollout taught me something about how the system needed to adapt. The numbers were concrete. We cut processing times by 47%. Receiving goods that used to take 4 hours now took 2 hours and 10 minutes because the system was telling people exactly where to put things. We eliminated almost all of the shipping errors that were happening because of manual rerouting. We went from something like 2% of shipments needing correction to 0.07%. We reduced carrying costs by 23% because we finally had real-time visibility into what was sitting where and for how long. We could see when inventory was stalling, and we could adjust routing to move it faster. We were managing $180 million in live shipments at any given time. Trucks on the road, goods in motion across facilities, goods sitting in warehouses, All of it coordinated by systems I designed and maintained. When I was hired, the company was profitable, but constrained. We were making money, but we were also leaving money on the table because our operational efficiency was capped by technology from the 1990s. By the time I finished rolling out the WMS across all 47 facilities, we were moving more volume with fewer staff hours, lower error rates, and better margins. The WMS wasn't just a system, it was the nervous system of the entire distribution network. It was the thing that let 47 separate facilities operate like a single, unified organism. So I sat there across from Chelsea Drummond while she told me she needed fresh energy, and I felt something shift in me that I didn't quite have a name for. Not anger, exactly. Clarity, maybe. A crystalline understanding of something I'd been blind to. I was being removed from a system whose complexity she couldn't measure and wouldn't bother to understand. And she was asking me to document it as if it were self-explanatory, as if 12 years of architectural decisions, design patterns, integration points, and undocumented dependencies could be transplanted into someone else's head between now and 5 o'clock. I asked her who was handling the operational transition. She said she'd be looking at candidates for a new director role. A few months, probably. In the meantime, IT would manage the systems. I asked her if IT had been looped in on the handover. She said she'd send out an email. Today, probably. I remember standing up. The chair rolled back. I shook her hand. She held it a little too long, the way people do when they want you to know they respect you, even though they're making a decision you might not like. It was an uncomfortable moment, and she knew it was uncomfortable, and neither of us knew what to do about it except perform respect at each other while the ground shifted underneath both of us. I picked up the box I'd brought that morning, the box you bring when you're not sure what the day is going to bring. The box you bring on a day when something in your gut tells you things might not be fine. I walked out of her office and down the hallway back to my own space. My team was still at their desks. 3 people. Sarah, who'd been with me for 8 years. Marcus, who joined when we did the Southeast expansion. Jennifer, who was newer but had been ramping up faster than anyone I'd worked with. Sarah looked up at me and something shifted in her face. She knew. Something in the way I was moving or holding myself told her everything she needed to know. I told them that I was heading out and I'd be in touch. I didn't say fired. They didn't ask. We all understood what we were doing. A small performance of professional distance, while the ground was still shifting under all of us. The company would send an official email within an hour. By then I'd be gone. The box was mostly empty. 12 years, and there wasn't much I actually needed to take with me. A framed photo of my wife. My Hugo Award from a logistics tech conference in 2019, the one the company had paid for me to attend and speak at. The coffee mug from the company's 40th anniversary that someone had handed out to everyone at the all-hands meeting. That was it. Everything else lived in systems and backups and my own knowledge. My actual work, the thing I'd spent 12 years building, couldn't fit in a box, couldn't be carried, could only be understood by someone who'd spent 12 years building it. I handed my badge to the security guard on the way out. He'd seen me every day for 12 years, and he said, "Have a good evening, Mr. Patterson," like every other day. I said, "Thanks, Tom," like every other day. I walked through the lobby at 3:15 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, carrying a box with 3 objects in it, and I didn't look back. The drive home was strange. It was a warm day in March. The roads were clear. The radio was playing something innocuous. I was unemployed. At 43, I was unemployed because someone with an MBA and a PowerPoint presentation about operational modernization had decided that whatever fresh energy she was bringing was more important than understanding what already existed. I thought about calling my wife but decided to wait. Some things need to be said in person. My wife was at home. She works in marketing, remote most days. She was on her laptop when I walked in, probably finishing up a call with a client. She looked at me, and she just knew. We'd been together for 18 years, married for 15. She could read the way I moved, the way I was holding myself. It was the same way I could read the WMS. Every signal told a story. I told her what happened. She closed her laptop and made coffee without asking. We sat at the kitchen table, and I told her the whole thing. All of it. The conversation in Chelsea's office, her exact words, the box I'd brought, the way Sarah had looked at me, the walk through the lobby. She didn't try to make me feel better about it, or tell me it would be fine, or launch into some speech about how this was actually an opportunity. She just listened. She'd learned over 18 years that sometimes you just listen. Then she said, "They don't understand what they just did." And she was right. She was so right. That night, I felt things in sequence, like waves hitting a beach. Anger came first. Genuine anger. 12 years. The system I designed was making money hand over fist. The company was growing. Everything I'd built was working flawlessly. And I was out because someone decided that my presence was in the way of their narrative about modernization. Who was I to argue with a vision, even if that vision was built on zero actual knowledge of what the vision was supposed to replace? Then the anger faded into sadness, a deep, aching sadness. The work I loved, the problem-solving, the integration challenges, the late nights I'd spent in engineering solving something that nobody else understood was even broken. The quarterly reviews where we'd look at efficiency metrics and see them improve, quarter after quarter, year after year. The colleagues I'd worked with for a decade, the relationships, the trust, that was gone. Not for any performance reason, not because I'd failed at what I was supposed to do, not for anything I'd done wrong, just because someone had decided to redecorate, and I was the old furniture. But underneath the anger and the sadness, there was something else. A cold clarity. A knowledge that crystallized as the evening went on and the house got quiet. I knew exactly what I'd built. I knew exactly what would happen when that system met the real world without me in it. I knew the dependencies that nobody had documented. I knew the back doors I'd built for emergency access. I knew the fail-safes and the workarounds and the places where the architecture depended on knowledge that was stored exclusively in my head. And I knew something else. That knowledge was mine. It wasn't theirs. It wasn't the company's. It was mine. The architecture couldn't be handed off in a folder. It couldn't be transferred in an email. It couldn't be explained by someone who hadn't lived inside it for 12 years. It was like asking someone to explain how to play the violin by reading a book about violin construction. The system was my instrument, and they'd just fired the musician. I tried to sleep around 11. My wife fell asleep beside me quickly, the kind of sleep that comes from an exhausting day of normal work. But I lay in the dark, aware of everything. The weight of the blanket, the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the ticking of the air conditioning cycling on, my own heart beating. Around midnight, I felt my phone vibrate on the nightstand. I didn't check it immediately. I knew who it was. I knew what was happening. I just lay there in the dark and let my phone light up beside me, the screen casting a little glow on the ceiling. It was Tom Caldwell from IT. The message was calm, professional, and below the surface, deeply confused. "Hey Derek, getting some alerts on the WMS licensing. The renewal seems to have failed. Can you give me a call?" The thing about a custom licensing architecture is that it runs on an automated cycle. Every year, right at midnight on the anniversary of the system's activation, it attempts to renew. It validates the credential tied to my employee profile. Once I was no longer an employee, once that profile was deactivated, which Chelsea had done, or had instructed HR to do, or had arranged somewhere in the handoff process without even knowing what she was triggering, the renewal would fail. I didn't respond. I set the phone face down on the nightstand and lay back in the dark, staring at the ceiling, knowing exactly what was about to happen. It was like watching a domino that you'd lined up 12 years ago finally tip over. At 12:47 a.m., the core WMS processes went offline. I wasn't there to see it happen. I was lying in bed in the dark, but I could picture it with perfect clarity. The authentication failure when the system tried to validate my credentials against the employee database. The timeout cascade as the system tried to failover and found no valid configuration to fall back to. The automatic failover attempting to engage and failing because there was no failover for this scenario. The scenario where the person who designed and licensed the system was no longer an employee. The system entering a wait state, trying again, timing out again. And then, as the wait exceeded its threshold, the cascade beginning in earnest. Real-time inventory management, offline. The 60-second sync cycle broken. 47 warehouses suddenly unable to see what inventory was where. The visibility that had replaced the old darkness, now dark again. Truck dispatch and routing, offline. Trucks in motion no longer receiving updated routing. New shipments no longer being automatically assigned to the optimal facilities. The intelligent choreography of $180 million in live shipments suddenly turned into a traffic jam. Dock door access codes, the ones that rotated every 24 hours, tied exclusively to the WMS authentication. Those codes stopped rotating. The security protocol that had been refreshing automatically for 12 years suddenly frozen. The physical infrastructure lost its coordination. Dock doors have backup manual codes, but those are for emergencies. You don't run a 47-facility network on emergency procedures. You don't ask people to manually punch in backup codes at 1 a.m. on a Tuesday while hundreds of trucks are queued up and waiting. Shipment tracking, offline. Thousands of shipments in the system, thousands of clients checking status, and nobody could see anything. Carrier coordination, offline. The APIs that have been talking to our major carriers, UPS, FedEx, ABF, Old Dominion, regional carriers, all silent. The automation that had been running seamlessly for a decade suddenly gone. The carrier's systems waiting for pings that weren't coming. At 2 in the morning, there was probably a conference call happening somewhere in the building. Maybe it hadn't been called yet, but it would be. People I didn't know were going to try to figure out why a system that had been humming along perfectly at 6 p.m. on Tuesday was suddenly non-responsive. The IT team was probably checking logs, trying to understand what error had triggered. The operations team was probably calling the warehouse managers, or they were calling the operations team. The CFO was probably doing math in his head on how much this was costing per minute, trying to quantify the exposure. My phone kept lighting up. I saw fragments of the messages without fully reading them. A text from Sarah at 1:17 a.m. Short, probably just asking if I was okay or if I knew what was happening. Another from IT at 1:43 a.m., more urgent now, probably asking if the licensing documentation was somewhere accessible. The voicemail notifications piling up. I didn't respond. I didn't acknowledge any of it. I just lay there in the dark and watched the ceiling. By 3 in the morning, the scale was probably visible. 47 warehouses without real-time inventory management. That meant dock supervisors who couldn't tell truck drivers where to unload goods. That meant shipping supervisors who couldn't pull the right goods for the trucks that were waiting. Trucks stranded at wrong facilities because the automated rerouting wasn't working. The system that had been making sure every truck was at the right place was offline. $180 million in live shipments frozen in the supply chain. Goods that were supposed to be moving. Goods that were supposed to arrive at distribution centers and retail locations the next morning. All of it stopped. Carriers couldn't coordinate pickups because the system wasn't talking to them. Dock doors couldn't operate on their normal security protocols. Warehouse staff were paralyzed. You can't process freight without knowing where it's supposed to go. You can't move goods without knowing what you've got. You can't know what you've got when the system that knows that is offline. I dozed intermittently. When I was awake, I could feel the weight of it, the magnitude. The company was probably entering crisis mode. Maybe they were trying to reach me. Maybe they were trying to reach someone else who might know something. Maybe they were trying to figure out who actually understood the WMS well enough to know how to even begin troubleshooting. The answer was, nobody but me. And I was lying in bed in the dark, knowing exactly what was happening. By 6 in the morning, the sun was coming up over the neighborhood. By 7, I was awake, and the first real cascade of calls and voicemails began hitting my phone. The thing about a system failure at that scale is that it radiates outward. It's not just internal. It's clients calling their logistics directors asking why their shipments aren't arriving. It's carriers calling dispatch asking why loads can't sync. It's warehouse managers trying to explain to shift supervisors why they can't access dock systems. It's the CFO checking his phone every minute wondering how much money the company is losing. I made coffee, just like any other day. Went through the motions. My wife was awake. She'd been looking at her own phone, probably seeing the news about the distribution network having critical outages, or hearing about it through industry channels. The kind of thing that spreads fast in logistics circles. She asked if I wanted to talk about it. I said no. I said I needed to think. I sat at the kitchen table with the coffee cooling in front of me, and I started going through the voicemails. The first few were from Tom Caldwell in IT, his voice progressively more strained with each message. Hey, if you're awake, we need to talk about the WMS licensing. The renewal failed somehow. Everything's down. Can you call me back immediately? That was at 12:52 a.m. Then another at 1:45 a.m., his voice higher, tighter. Derek, this is critical. The entire system is offline. I don't even know where to start troubleshooting. If you get this, please call back ASAP. Another at 3:15 a.m., his voice exhausted now, sounding like he'd been trying things for hours. I don't know what happened. The system just went offline. Everything's cascading. I need you to call back now. Then one from Richard Yates, the operations director, not Chelsea. A guy named Richard who'd been at the company almost as long as I had. His voice calm but strained. Derek, something's happened with the warehouse system. Everything's down. We're in crisis mode here. We need you to call back as soon as you can. Then one from the CFO, actually the CEO, which is worse. Mr. Patterson, this is Marcus Webb, CEO. We have a critical situation with our warehouse infrastructure. I need you to call me back immediately. Chelsea had left voicemails too. The first two were terse, demanding. Derek, it's Chelsea. The IT team is telling me there's a problem with the system. I need you to call me back and explain what's happening. And then, 20 minutes later, her voice already shifting, already cracking. I don't understand what's happening. Please call me. Not demanding anymore. Asking. Desperate. Then a third one from Chelsea, her voice completely different now. Not demanding, not confident, just trying, just genuine. I made a mistake. That's literally what she said. I made a mistake. I don't understand what I just did. Can you please call me? I need to understand what's happening. But by then, I was already dialing Marcus Webb's cell phone. He picked up on the first ring, like he'd been holding the phone waiting for calls all night. Like I was the only person on earth who could answer the questions in his head. I said, Marcus, it's Derek. I'm going to walk you through what happened and what it's going to take to fix it. And I did. Calmly. Precisely. I explained the licensing architecture. I explained why it was tied specifically to my employee profile and not to some generic company account. I explained that once my credentials were deactivated, the annual renewal couldn't complete. The system tried to validate against the database, found nothing, and entered a wait state, then entered an error state, then cascaded offline. I explained that the system didn't have a failover for that scenario because that scenario wasn't supposed to exist. If you were removing the architect of a critical system, you coordinated that removal in a way that didn't create a catastrophic gap. I explained that the system could be restored from the secure backups I'd maintained independently. The backups I kept at home, the backups that nobody at the company even knew existed. I explained that it would take about 4 hours to do it cleanly, without data loss, without corruption. I explained that it needed to be done by someone who understood the architecture. I explained that there was, realistically, only one person who understood it well enough to do it under time pressure without breaking something else. I told him what I wanted. 6 months as a full-time remote consultant, $35,000 a month. Direct line to him, to the CEO. No reporting to Chelsea Drummond. No operational duties beyond the system restoration and any infrastructure issues that might surface as a result of the emergency. He didn't negotiate. He didn't say he had to think about it or talk to his board or his CFO. He said yes. He said he'd have the contract drawn up and in my email in 40 minutes. He thanked me. He said he was sorry that this had happened. Then he asked me to call Richard Yates and let him know I was coming back online. Not as director, not as an employee, but as the person who was going to unfuck this situation. The contract came through in my inbox at 7:43 a.m. I read it on my laptop at the kitchen table. It said exactly what we'd agreed to. 6 months, $35,000 per month, direct report to CEO, full authority over system restoration. All the technical details were there. I signed it electronically and sent it back immediately. Then I set up my work environment. I opened my encrypted backup drive, the one I kept at home, the one nobody at the company even knew existed. It was a simple external drive with military-grade encryption. Inside was a complete image of the WMS architecture, the licensed version, the unlicensed version, the source code, the infrastructure specifications, the license key, the original authentication credentials, everything. It took 3 hours and 47 minutes to restore the system completely and bring all 47 facilities back online. I didn't rush. I could have rushed, but rushing is how you break things in ways that take weeks to understand. I did it methodically, deliberately, one layer at a time. First came the licensing infrastructure. I restored the authentication layer, re-embedded the credentials, regenerated the license keys. That took 43 minutes because I had to verify each step, make sure nothing was corrupted, make sure the system could validate properly before we went further. Then came the core WMS database. I had 3 backup copies, each from different time periods, and I restored the most recent one, verified the integrity, checked for corruption, waited for the system to validate itself. Then came the regional infrastructure. The WMS came back up in regions, the way it had gone down, starting with the East Coast hubs. Each region came online individually, each one validated before I moved to the next. The dock door codes began rotating again. The security protocol that had been frozen suddenly alive again. The inventory sync re-engaged, facilities suddenly able to see what they had again. The carrier APIs came online. The truck dispatch started pushing jobs again. Trucks that had been sitting idle for hours suddenly getting routed to the right facilities. Dock doors that had been locked down on emergency protocols suddenly able to operate normally. I could see it happening in real time through the monitoring dashboards. The system waking up. The complexity coming back to life. The thing I'd built 12 years earlier, the thing that Chelsea Drummond didn't understand, suddenly operational again. By 12:50 p.m., all 47 facilities were operational. The inventory sync was running. The carrier APIs were talking. The trucks that had been stranded were getting routed. The supply chain that had been frozen was moving again. I sent Marcus a one-line email. All 47 facilities are back online. Chelsea sent me a text while I was working. Please call me. Then another one, 10 minutes later. I'm sorry. Then another one. Can we talk? I didn't respond. I just kept working. Kept making sure the system was stable. Kept running diagnostics. Kept making sure nothing had gotten corrupted in the restoration process. When the system was back up and I was confident it would stay up, I closed my laptop and made lunch. I ate at the kitchen table. My wife ordered Thai food and we had dinner together that evening. We didn't really talk about it. We just sat together and ate. The weight had shifted. The panic had moved from my bedroom to the executive offices of the company I'd just walked out of 12 hours earlier. Over the next few weeks, things unfolded the way these things do. Chelsea made some kind of conversation with Marcus about the situation. What that conversation was, I never knew. But a week later, she was quietly reassigned to a strategy and planning role. Not fired. The company wasn't going to create that liability or set that precedent, but moved. Removed from anything that touched the actual distribution network. She became someone who created slideshows about future optimization scenarios, while other people actually ran the operation. I finished out my 6-month contract. I did more than I'd agreed to. Built documentation that was actually comprehensive, not just the kind of thing you scribble down before you leave. The kind of documentation that made the architecture visible. The kind that explained not just what the system did, but why it did it that way. I created decision trees, architectural diagrams, integration guides. I documented every API connection, every database schema, every piece of business logic that had been living in my head. I trained a junior architect named Kyle who showed real promise. He was smart enough to ask the right questions and patient enough to wait for answers that took a long time to explain. He was the kind of person who wanted to actually understand things instead of just using them. Over the course of 6 months, I walked Kyle through every significant system in the WMS. I showed him the decisions I'd made and why I'd made them. I showed him the places where the architecture was flexible and where it needed to be rigid. By month 4, I was training him on the complete architecture, letting him shadow me on maintenance work, letting him troubleshoot smaller issues under my guidance. I created failover protocols and redundancies so the single point of failure that I represented could never happen again. I built backup license systems. I documented the emergency access procedures. I created automated monitoring so the system could alert humans to problems before they became catastrophic. I built the kind of resilience that meant the company could survive without me, even though they'd learned that the hard way. By month 6, Kyle could theoretically take over if something happened to me. Not perfectly. There would be a learning curve, and there would be things that took him longer than they'd take me. But he could do it. The system had been depersonalized. The knowledge had been transferred. The company was no longer dependent on me in the way it had been. They were no longer vulnerable in the way they'd become vulnerable for 12 minutes at 12:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. By month 6, I knew what I was going to do next. I'd spent my whole career building systems for other people's companies, being the expert in someone else's infrastructure, knowing things no one else knew, and discovering that knowledge doesn't buy you the security you think it does. Not in a place where someone can walk in on day 4 and decide that the architecture doesn't fit their vision. Not in a place where organizational transformation takes priority over operational continuity. I started my own firm. Systems architecture for mid-market and enterprise distribution networks. Not consulting where you show up for 6 months and hand off documentation. Actual architectural work. Designing systems, building them, implementing them, training teams, doing the thing I'd proven I was good at, but on my own terms this time. Building systems for companies that understood what they were asking for, that valued what I knew before trying to remove it. The first client came through a referral from someone at my old company. They needed to replace a system that was failing catastrophically. They'd heard about what happened. The whole incident had gotten around the industry somehow, the way these things do. The story of the architect who got fired and then saved the company. The story of the system that was so well designed that it locked the company out the moment you removed the person who built it. They called me directly. They said they wanted someone who understood distribution systems at a fundamental level. They said they wanted someone who designed for resilience and understood the cost of failure. I quoted them a rate that was about 40% higher than what I'd charged for consulting work. I expected negotiation. I expected them to push back. They said yes immediately. They didn't try to get me to work for equity or make promises about future bonuses or tie my compensation to some vague future outcome. They just paid the price of expertise. Expertise that had been proven in crisis. I started building their system in month 7. By year 1, I delivered a complete WMS redesign. By year 2, I had 3 full-time clients and a small team working with me. By year 3, I couldn't take on new projects, even if I wanted to. The referrals were coming constantly. People who wanted the architect who understood what he was doing. Distribution directors calling me. CFOs calling me. CEOs calling me. All of them wanting the person who understood systems, who designed them properly, who knew what it meant to build something that would survive its creator's absence. None of them were from McKinsey. None of them had spent 3 years learning consulting frameworks and believing they could apply those frameworks to every situation. They were people who understood complexity, who understood that good systems weren't about being new. They were about being right. Looking back at that moment in Chelsea's office, at the feeling of certainty that something was wrong but not knowing what, I understand now. It wasn't that I was underestimating how much people can carry into a decision they don't understand. It was that I was underestimating what I was actually worth and how little a position in someone else's organization could change that. I'd tied my sense of value to a job title, a steady paycheck, a place in an organizational chart. I'd thought that removing me from that title meant removing my value. The WMS I built is still running. It's been upgraded and iterated on since I left, which is fine. Good systems should evolve. They should improve. They should be built so well that other people can build on top of them. But the bones of it, the architecture underneath, that's still what I designed. The logic, the patterns, the way it thinks about the problem. 47 warehouses are still moving goods because of something I understood completely, and Chelsea Drummond didn't understand at all. That's what I know now. Your value doesn't disappear when someone decides you don't fit their vision. Sometimes it just becomes visible in a different way. Sometimes losing the place where you're essential teaches you what it means to actually be essential. It teaches you that your worth isn't determined by who employs you. It teaches you that knowledge, once it's in your head, belongs to you forever. It teaches you that the right people, the ones who actually understand what they're looking at, will find you. I'm building systems now on my own terms, working with people who understand what I do and who value it before they try to remove it. People who recognize the complexity I'm working with instead of trying to simplify it away. Distribution directors who understand that a good WMS isn't a line item in a budget. It's the difference between a supply chain that works and one that doesn't. It's the difference between moving goods efficiently and watching money leak out through operational inefficiency. It's better this way. It took getting fired on someone's 4th day to figure it out, but I got there. I built something they couldn't replicate. I made myself essential. And then I made that matter on my own terms. I'm building systems that will outlive me, systems that are documented so well that when I'm gone, the next person can understand them. I'm building resilience. I'm building the kind of architecture that survives leadership transitions and organizational changes and the arrival of new executives who think they know what they're doing. The WMS I built for my old company is still running. It's been upgraded. It's been improved by Kyle and the team that came after him. That's fine. That's how it should be. The bones of it, the way it thinks, that's still what I designed. I'm proud of that. I'm proud that I built something that endures. I'm proud that it made money for a company that didn't understand what it had. I'm proud that removing me didn't break it permanently, even though it broke temporarily. That means I did it right. That's what I know now. Your value doesn't disappear when someone decides you don't fit their vision. The systems you build stay built. The knowledge you carry stays with you. The people who understand what you do will find you. It took a midnight licensing failure and $180 million in frozen shipments, and a CEO calling me on his personal cell phone to figure it out. But I figured it out, and that's worth something.